song did you sing at 4?
Tomorrow.
From Annie?
From Annie, yeah.
Simon, that is Simon's worst song.
Then when I was 4 as well.
Well, so do we.
I can't wait.
Thank you.
When Sydnie Christmas stepped onto the Britain's Got Talent stage, no one could have predicted what would follow. A humble gym receptionist with a voice forged in struggle and soul, she transformed a routine audition into something seismic. As her final note echoed, the studio held its breath, and Simon Cowell, known for his unshakable composure, broke down in front of millions. What had started as a simple performance became an emotional earthquake that stunned the nation and reminded us why we believe in dreams. A voice born from silence. Before her voice soared through the airwaves and left millions breathless, Sydnie Christmas was just a quiet girl from Kent with dreams far louder than her circumstances. Born into a home where every penny mattered, her earliest years were shaped by financial struggles, but also by an extraordinary family love that refused to let hardship mute potential. From as young as 5, Sydnie showed signs that music wasn't just a hobby, it was in her bones. With no access to real instruments, she found magic in the mundane. Wooden spoons bound with rubber bands became guitars. Old pots and pans doubled as drums. Even the fragile steps of their creaky staircase turned into a makeshift xylophone. While other children played games, Sydnie orchestrated symphonies using whatever she could find. Through the thin walls of their home, neighbors would often catch the muffled rhythm of a little girl creating her world out of sound. The turning point came in 2004. Despite their tight budget, her parents scraped together £78, nearly a full week's wage, to buy a second-hand karaoke machine from a nearby charity shop. It was scratched, unreliable and slightly broken, but to Sydnie, it was everything. That old machine transformed their tiny living room into her stage, her sanctuary, her secret music school. Night after night, she sang her heart out to her first audience, her exhausted but proud parents. School life was far less forgiving. Sydnie was teased for wearing hand-me-down clothes and bringing weird lunches. Classmates whispered behind her back, unaware that the girl they mocked went home to study vocal techniques and rehearse for hours. When words couldn't explain how she felt, music stepped in. It became her armor, her refuge, and her voice when the world refused to listen. Teachers noticed that she would often hum while working, sometimes without realizing it. She'd become so absorbed in rhythm and melody that it spilled into every part of her day. Over time, the karaoke microphone developed a constant static hiss from overuse, but Sydnie adapted. That buzzing machine taught her to sing with power, clarity, and soul, traits that later defined her signature style. She didn't just sing through the flaws, she learned to thrive in them. While her peers hung out after school, Sydnie followed a strict, self-made training regime. Vocal warm-ups before breakfast, breath control exercises on her walk home, and performance routines after dinner. Her bedroom walls were covered with handwritten notes, breaking down the vocal techniques of artists she admired. Without money for piano lessons, she borrowed old music theory books from the local library and taught herself. When the school choir needed expensive uniforms, she volunteered to manage the sheet music instead. Every setback was a lesson in resilience. Every limitation pushed her creativity further. By her teenage years, Sydnie's voice had developed a richness and emotional depth far beyond her age. And through it all, that battered karaoke machine continued to capture the evolution of a girl becoming something far greater than anyone had expected. But what if the voice that stunned the world was also the only thing holding her together? Keep watching to find out. Shadows before spotlight. As Sydnie Christmas's voice grew richer and more mature, so did the weight of her reality. What had begun as a child's creative escape now became a fragile thread holding her together through some of the darkest years of her life. Between the ages of 14 and 18, Sydnie's world narrowed, not because of a lack of ambition, but because of the constant pressure of bullying, financial hardship, and emotional battles no one could see. What started as childish teasing in the schoolyard slowly turned into daily torment. Her classmates mocked not only her clothes and home life, but also her dreams. During music class, students would deliberately drown out her singing, and when she shared her covers online, social media became a hunting ground for cruel remarks. More than once, Sydnie arrived at school only to discover her YouTube videos had become the latest joke in the hallways. Her voice, the one thing that gave her power, was being used against her. After high school, she had no choice but to jump straight into work. In 2019, at just 18, Sydnie began working the front desk at Pure Gym in Canterbury, earning £9.50 an hour. The job came with strict rules. Phones were off limits, and singing of any kind was not allowed on shift. Co-workers remembered her as focused, quiet, and often lost in thought. They didn't know that during her breaks, Sydnie was using a cracked phone screen to watch vocal tutorials and record herself practicing, even if it meant sitting alone in the locker room. When the gym radio played and Sydnie quietly hummed along, she was reminded to stop. Singing wasn't part of the job, but the stress of silence began to show. Her hands shook from the emotional toll, a symptom she dismissed as tiredness. By 19, she was hiding patches of hair loss under thick beanies, even in the summer heat, the result of stress-induced alopecia. National Health Service mental health records later revealed she'd made 2 attempts to seek support, but scheduling conflicts and long shifts forced her to stop.
I was like, do not get me to sing this song. And then, obviously...
Inside the pocket of her gym apron, Sydnie kept a handwritten note from her father. They hear the voice, but not the years. It was their private reminder of the long nights she'd spent perfecting just one aria from Handel's Messiah, singing it again and again until the karaoke speaker finally gave out. Her mother's words, "The right ears will hear you when it's time," became her mantra during 6:30 a.m. bus rides through the gray mornings of Kent. A routine day at the gym turned unexpectedly pivotal. While mopping the floor one evening, she sang along softly to a track playing overhead. A local music teacher overheard her and was struck by the depth of her tone. Without knowing her story, the teacher offered free coaching sessions to anyone who helped with weekend music classes. Sydnie volunteered without hesitation. It would be the first formal training she'd received since primary school, and only lasted 4 months before the teacher relocated, but it was a spark. Determined to keep learning, she found a retired opera instructor on a music forum and began commuting to London every other weekend in early 2020. Each round trip cost her most of her pay. Her practice room became the 5:15 a.m. train from Canterbury to St. Pancras, where she often received curious looks and sometimes even applause from strangers. Unable to afford bus fare afterward, she'd walk the 5 miles home from the gym, often with less than £20 to stretch through the week. Her journey was mostly invisible. A documentary crew later uncovered her private vocal notebooks, thick with notes, critiques, and strategies. One heartbreaking entry, written 3 days before her 21st birthday, read, "Maybe it's not the voice that's the problem. Maybe it's me." But just 1 day later, she sketched out a new vocal warm-up based on breathing techniques she'd observed in swimmers at the gym. Every whispered song in the stairwell, every moment spent singing above the booming gym playlist, every interruption from curious members, these weren't distractions. They were unorthodox lessons. Bit by bit, the voice that would later leave Simon Cowell in tears was being forged in the most unlikely of places. The audition that nearly never was. By early 2024, Sydnie Christmas had grown used to swallowing doubt like medicine. Behind her quiet confidence was a storm of hesitation, especially when it came to one decision she kept putting off: applying for Britain's Got Talent. For 37 straight days, her audition form sat untouched on the website, partially filled in, then erased, then reopened. Day after day, during her lunch breaks at Pure Gym in Canterbury, the same cycle repeated. Type a few lines, second-guess everything, close the tab. It wasn't until February 12, 2024, just 3 hours before the midnight deadline, that she finally applied. The decision came during her evening shift, when the gym was closed, and the silence offered a strange kind of courage. Sitting behind the reception desk, where she spent 6 days a week answering calls and checking key cards, She used the staff computer to upload her audition tape. On the line marked occupation, she didn't write gym receptionist. She simply wrote singer, a small act of belief that felt enormous. The video she submitted was recorded in her childhood bedroom, the walls still covered with scribbled vocal notes. Her voice carried through the same karaoke machine she'd been using since her teens, still patched together with tape. She chose Ave Maria, one of the few songs the machine could handle without distorting the sound. A 90-second clip, a lifetime packed into a minute and a half. 2 weeks later, her parents accidentally discovered the truth. A charge of £32.50 appeared on their joint bank account. Confused, they confronted her, but not with anger. As captured in security camera footage later featured in a 2024 documentary, her father simply pulled her into a tight, silent hug. Then, through the family's old audio system, he told her, "However this goes today, you have become a singer to the world." It was the first time anyone had said it out loud. In the lead-up to the audition, Sydnie became distant at work. Co-workers noticed she seemed distracted, forgetting locker codes and miscounting payments. Many assumed it was due to relationship drama. None guessed she was secretly practicing in the gym's aerobic studio after hours, rehearsing in front of mirrored walls that served as her first audience. Her practice diary from this time is filled with notes like "Hold final note longer than edit cuts" and "Smile, on high C, don't show nerves." The night before the audition in London, she didn't sleep. Hotel records show she ordered lemon and honey at 3:42 a.m. and extra towels at 1:17 a.m., used to soundproof the bathroom so she could rehearse without waking other guests. Global Positioning System data later revealed she walked 6.3 kilometers around the hotel, passing the independent television studios 3 separate times before finally entering. Backstage, she looked calm, but her hands trembled. She declined water, a singer's trick to avoid excess phlegm. Intake forms listed only local performances, quietly omitting the 4,327 YouTube subscribers she had gathered over the years of late-night covers. When the stage manager called her number, she waited 2.88 seconds before stepping forward. She later described it as deciding whether or not to breathe again. She took 14 slow steps to the center stage. The audience barely noticed, but every movement was measured. Camera operators even had to adjust their angles. She kept shifting her weight, not from nerves, but out of habit, from years of singing on uneven floors. The judges looked on with caution. Simon Cowell hadn't even opened his notebook. Amanda Holden's smile was polite but distracted. But something was building. The air just before her performance was charged with something no one could quite name. It was the beginning of a story no one, not even Sydnie, fully saw coming. But what made those quiet, uneven steps signal the start of something unforgettable? Stay glued. Everything changed in the next breath. The turning point. The applause from her first audition still echoed in the public imagination. But behind the scenes, Sydnie Christmas was barely holding it together. In the weeks leading up to Britain's Got Talent semi-finals in spring 2024, the once-determined 28-year-old from Kent faced something far harsher than nerves: the digital aftermath of fame. Online critics, many anonymous and brutal, flooded social media with cutting remarks about her voice, her background, even her appearance. Who had already spent much of her life fighting to be heard, the sudden spotlight brought with it a storm of doubts. It was during these long, anxious days that a string of late-night calls traced back to her parents' home in Kent. One particular call, lasting 47 minutes, would later be referred to by insiders as her crisis point. According to studio logs and call records, that conversation took place just after midnight, with Sydnie pacing a back hallway of the studio, holding her phone tight against her ear as if trying to pull her parents' voices closer. She didn't cry, but her hands trembled. Backstage reports tell of a noticeable change. During rehearsals, she canceled 3 consecutive attempts at her originally planned Whitney Houston cover, her safe song. Her voice faltered, not from lack of skill, but from sheer emotional exhaustion. In wardrobe fittings, her fingers shook As stylists tried to zip up a sequined dress she would eventually reject. A production assistant later recalled walking past a dim dressing room to find Sydnie alone, scrolling through social media with a blank expression, as though trying to memorize every insult. Not in anger, just in disbelief. But something shifted after that late-night call. Her father's words, "Sing like no one's listening because it was never for them, it's for you," did more than comfort her. They snapped her out of survival mode. The next morning, she made two bold decisions. She changed her semi-final song to one that hadn't been pre-approved and requested that the production team cut the emotional backstory package about her working-class upbringing. The producers pushed back. There were concerns over continuity, audience connection, and last-minute orchestration changes. But Sydnie wouldn't budge. "If they're going to hate me anyway," she told one crew member, "I might as well give them the real me." In the final rehearsals, the change was undeniable. She wasn't counting beats or marking breath holds. She sang with her back to the empty chairs during one run-through, eyes closed. No longer performing for validation, she was expressing something deeper. She rejected the stylist's glittery dress and instead chose black trousers and a simple white blouse, an elevated echo of her pure gym uniform. Most telling of all, just minutes before the live show, she slipped her old staff lanyard from her neck and tucked it into her pocket. When a crew member offered to hold it, she simply said, "This stays with me, but it doesn't define me anymore." As she walked on stage, the weight of her chosen song revealed itself. The classic "My Way," so often overused, suddenly felt redefined, reshaped by the woman who had clawed her way out of doubt, mockery, and fear. When she sang, "And now the end is near," the audience stilled. A few leaned forward. The words landed with an unexpected heaviness. By the time she reached, "I did it my way," even the cameramen were struggling to stay professional. Break the moment. The room held its breath. She sang the final line, "I did it my way," and then stood there, perfectly still. The theater, packed with thousands, somehow felt empty for a heartbeat. No rustling, no whispers, no coughs, just silence, dense and fragile. It was not the kind of quiet that followed polite appreciation. It was the kind that wrapped itself around the room, thick with something sacred. And it hadn't happened by accident. As Sydnie Christmas poured herself into My Way on the Britain's Got Talent semi-final stage that night in May 2024, production teams behind the scenes started noticing anomalies. Decibel readers, which typically waver between 65 and 70 decibels from constant audience noise, shuffles, cheers, camera clicks, were dropping. 1 meter, placed above the front row, clocked in at 42 decibels. That's the kind of silence normally measured in acoustic labs. A junior camera operator, thinking his headset had disconnected, tapped his equipment twice before realizing no one was speaking, no one was moving, everyone was just listening. But the performance didn't just shift the atmosphere, it broke something open in Simon Cowell. Exactly 1 minute and 42 seconds into Sydnie's performance on the lyric, "I've loved, I've laughed and cried," the famously composed judge reacted in a way he never had before.
It wasn't a 10, it was an 11 in my opinion.
His right hand rose instinctively to cover his mouth, and for the first time in the show's history, the live control room issued an unscripted direction. Camera 3, zoom, now. What they captured became the defining image of the season. His face, usually firm and unreadable, slowly shifted, eyes red, brows knit together, tears visible. It wasn't theatrical, it wasn't for show, it was real, and everyone knew it. Backstage footage, later aired in the series' retrospective, showed Cowell seated in silence for 12 seconds after the final note. He didn't speak, he didn't look at anyone. Then, almost to himself, he whispered to a nearby producer, "This is so heartbreaking." Audio analysts would later confirm his voice registered 8 hertz above his normal pitch, a telltale sign of suppressed emotion. He wasn't judging, he was feeling. When he finally stood and pressed the golden buzzer, it was slow, shaky, almost. What usually lasted a dramatic 3 or 4 seconds stretched to over 7.2 as his hand hovered, trembling slightly. "That's why I do this," he said aloud. Not about Sydnie's technical ability, but to the purity of her presence, her vulnerability. It marked the first time in the show's two-decade run that a judge's feedback focused not on skill or song choice, but on personal purpose. The aftermath was a wave. Golden confetti had to fall 3 times for the perfect take. Twitter exploded with the hashtag Cowell cries, reaching 142,000 tweets within an hour. My Way climbed back into the UK top 40 overnight.
Yeah, I was a little bit apprehensive, but within 2 seconds.
Google searches for how to sing with emotion rose by 1,700% by dawn. Music stores sold out of Sinatra sheet music. Vocal coaches began breaking down Sydnie's performance in online forums. Her unexpected use of rubato, the restraint in her vibrato, the way she added a grainy edge to the word loss like it carried its wound. But perhaps the most surprising ripple effect came from an unlikely place. 3 UK gym chains reported spikes in receptionist job applications. Many applicants, when asked why, pointed to a single name, Sydnie Christmas. But what turned a talent show victory into a chart-topping cultural shockwave that no one saw coming? Don't look away. From spotlight to skyrocket. And then, everything changed. In just 72 hours after that unforgettable Britain's Got Talent finale in June 2024, Sydnie Christmas wasn't just a winner, she was a phenomenon. Her rendition of My Way didn't quietly climb the UK singles chart. It launched unapologetically to the #1 spot, selling 187,000 units in its first week. It was the biggest first-week figure for a talent show winner since 2014. But what truly stunned the industry wasn't just the numbers, it was who was listening. A full 63% of the streams came from listeners under the age of 30.
But that would happen to me, so thank you. Deeply feel the love.
A generation raised on streaming and pop beats suddenly found themselves captivated by a voice and a song originally recorded decades before they were born. Through Sydnie's smoky, soulful delivery, Sinatra's classic found new life. Her cover wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural bridge. By July, the My Way tour was announced, 28 dates across the UK. Every single ticket sold out in under 6 minutes. Promoters scrambled. More shows were added, this time in stadiums. Observers noted the strange makeup of the crowd, half dressed like they were heading to a Taylor Swift concert, the other half in evening wear, ready for opera. Pop kids and classical purists, side by side. Somehow, Sydnie's voice had reached both. Decca Records moved fast. Within a month, she signed a historic contract. Industry insiders dubbed her their first post-genre artist, an acknowledgement that she couldn't be boxed into any one sound. She could do cabaret, torch songs, Broadway, ballads, and still sound like herself. This wasn't marketing, this was evolution. But the influence of Sydnie Christmas didn't end in arenas or record charts. It slipped into classrooms and community centers. According to new figures released in late 2024, music academies across the UK saw a 40% increase in scholarship applications from working-class youth. Several youth charities reported that vocal program sign-ups had doubled.
It means to sing this song, and then obviously you put your own.
Teachers said students who once mumbled through music lessons were suddenly practicing scales during lunch. Even her old gym franchise felt the impact. Pure Gym launched the Christmas Talent Fund, designed to help reception and fitness staff pursue artistic training, an echo of Sydnie's journey from behind the front desk to the main stage. Despite the global whirlwind, some things remained steady. Most Thursdays, Sydnie could still be found taking the southeastern train back to Kent. Her parents' house hadn't changed much, but the karaoke machine that started all had, it now sat behind glass, proudly displayed in the foyer of Abbey Road Studios. A full-circle tribute to the girl who once sang to herself in a childhood bedroom and ended up singing to the world. But what do you think made a humble gym receptionist leave Simon Cowell speechless and millions in tears with just one song? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.